Our channel shares stories that actually happened. Do you know or have experienced any shocking stories? We also tell the stories of our subscribers. Leave them in the comments so we can share them with the world. We want to hear from you. He was already starting to feel desperate. Every time he looked at Andrew, something didn't sit right, but no one would take him seriously. His mother, who was so completely enamored with Andrew, refused to even entertain the thought that something could be wrong. She just wanted to believe in the fairy tale, in the perfect man who had come into their lives. But he wasn't buying it. The more he observed Andrew, the more he noticed little things that didn't add up. Andrew's politeness, his charm, his constant attention, it all felt fake. His mother, Helen, would always praise him, talking about how he was so successful and how he treated her like a queen. But there was something in Andrew's eyes when he looked at him, something cold and calculating that made him uneasy. And every time he tried to speak up, to express his concerns, his mom would brush it off, telling him that he was just being protective or that he was too young to understand the complexities of relationships. But that didn't sit right either. He knew he wasn't imagining things. The unease had only grown over time, but each time he tried to explain it, it seemed like the walls closed in on him even more, as if no one else could see what he was seeing. The isolation he felt in that house, surrounded by people who thought he was just being paranoid, made him feel even more trapped. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time, that something was about to happen, and if he didn't act soon, he would lose the chance to protect his mother from something he couldn't yet fully understand. And then, the night he overheard Andrew speaking to his mother about their future plans, something snapped. Andrew's tone had changed. It was colder, more possessive. He talked about how their life together would be perfect, how nothing would get in the way. That was when he realized that his suspicions weren't just paranoia, they were right. Andrew wasn't just trying to charm his way into his mother's life, he had an agenda. He wasn't who he said he was, and his intentions were far darker than anyone could imagine. He couldn't let it go. He needed to act. He needed to find proof, but how? His mother would never believe him. That realization was the first blow. He was completely alone in this. There was no one else who could see what he was seeing, and even if he found the truth, it might never be enough. But there was no way he was going to let Andrew ruin their lives, even if it meant going against everyone who trusted him. He had to expose the truth no matter the cost. So, he made a decision. He was going to dig deeper. If he had to, he would do it alone. The next morning, as he sat in his room staring at the walls, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He knew he couldn't keep living with this gnawing feeling in his gut. It was eating him alive, and he needed answers. Something concrete that he could show to his mother. But how could he get that proof? How could he prove that Andrew, the man who seemed perfect in every way, was hiding something so dark and dangerous? The idea hit him like a punch in the stomach. He needed to do what he dreaded the most: investigate Andrew. The thought of snooping around, of going behind his mother's back, felt wrong. But at that point, what choice did he have? He was desperate. He couldn't just sit by and let his mother marry a man who might be dangerous, so he decided to start small. He spent the rest of the morning searching through the internet for any trace of Andrew. He found nothing. Not a single article about him or his so-called business empire. It was as if the man didn't exist outside of their little bubble. The more he searched, the more uneasy he felt. A successful businessman with no online presence? That made no sense. He had to be hiding something, and the only way to get to the truth was to keep looking. But how? He couldn't ask his mother for help. She'd think he was being paranoid again. That's when he turned to Emilio, his best friend. Emilio had always been the one who could dig into anything. If anyone could find something on Andrew, it was him. They agreed to meet after school that day, and the hours leading up to that meeting dragged on forever. As he walked through the hallways at school, his mind raced with thoughts of what he might uncover. He couldn't afford to fail. This wasn't just about proving himself right. It was about saving his mother from making the biggest mistake of her life. But even as he thought that, a small part of him worried. What if he was wrong? What if Andrew really was who he said he was? What if all this was just in his head? Those doubts clouded his mind, but he pushed them aside. He knew he had to do this. If he didn't, who else would? It was a heavy responsibility to bear. But he felt like there was no other choice. That afternoon he met up with Emilio, and together they started going through the few bits of information they had on Andrew. It didn't take long before they found something that would change everything. The moment they found it, his heart skipped a beat. It was a number. A phone number linked to Andrew that didn't show up in any public databases, not even in the most basic background check tools they used. It seemed like a ghost number, something that didn't belong in the real world. Miguel's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. Emilio was just as silent, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what they had found. "What now?" Emilio asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miguel didn't answer at first. His mind was racing. He knew this was the break he needed, but it also terrified him. What was he going to do with this information? How could he possibly confront his mother with something so vague? It wasn't like he could just walk up to her and say, "Hey, I found a phone number that doesn't belong to anyone, and I think it's linked to Andrew." She'd laugh at him. She would never believe him, especially not after everything he had already said about Andrew. But that number, it couldn't just be a coincidence. He felt it in his bones. Andrew had to be hiding something. They couldn't stop there, though. Miguel knew he needed more evidence, something that would make everything clear. He felt the urgency pressing on him, but at the same time, there was a lingering fear. What if he was wrong? What if Andrew was just a businessman who had some privacy? The doubt crept in, but Miguel quickly shoved it aside. He couldn't afford to be wrong. His mother's future was on the line. They couldn't stop there. That night, while his mother was out with Andrew for a romantic dinner, Miguel decided to go further. He had no idea what he was going to find, but he had to try. He snuck into his mother's room, knowing that she wouldn't be back for a while. His heart raced as he opened her drawer and pulled out the old dusty laptop she had used before. He felt like a criminal, sneaking around like this. But he didn't care. It was the only way. His hands shook as he opened the browser, typing in Andrew's name, then his number, hoping something would pop up. To his surprise, he found a few suspicious files that looked like they had been deleted recently. Miguel's heart pounded. He couldn't believe it. He was on to something. This was no longer about just a gut feeling. There was something real here. Something that his mother was deliberately hiding from him. He copied the files, promising to dig deeper later. As he heard footsteps approaching from downstairs, Miguel quickly closed everything and shoved the laptop back into the drawer. He had what he needed, or at least part of it. But he couldn't relax. His mind was still racing, and all he could think of was Andrew. What was he hiding? What had he gotten himself into? Was he truly a danger to his family, or was Miguel simply being paranoid? The questions swirled around in his head as he quietly slipped out of the room, hoping his mother wouldn't notice his absence. He had a plan now, but it was far from over. It felt like the beginning of something huge, something he wasn't sure he could stop. That night, Miguel couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying everything he had uncovered so far. The files, the strange phone number, the feeling of something being terribly off about Andrew. It all kept him awake. He tossed and turned in his bed, his thoughts racing. He couldn't stop thinking about what might happen if he didn't act soon. The truth was, he was scared. Scared of what Andrew could do if he truly was the monster Miguel feared. Scared of what would happen to his mother if he couldn't stop this marriage. And scared of how his mother would react if she found out that he had gone behind her back to investigate the man she loved. What would she think of him? Would she hate him for breaking her trust? But there was no time to waste. Miguel had already crossed a line. He couldn't turn back now. He needed to find out everything about Andrew, and fast. The next morning, as soon as he could get away, Miguel met with Emilio and Mateus again. He showed them the files he had taken from his mom's laptop, and together they began to piece everything together. That's when Mateus, who had a knack for finding connections that no one else could see, made a breakthrough. He found a link between Andrew's number and a missing persons case from 2 years ago, a woman named Adriana Collins. The more they dug, the clearer it became. Adriana had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and her last known contact had been Andrew. Miguel's stomach turned. He didn't need to see more, he already knew enough. Adriana had disappeared, and Andrew was the last person she had contacted. There was no doubt in Miguel's mind now. Andrew was hiding something, and it was something dangerous. He had to act. But how? He couldn't go to the police with just this information. It wasn't enough yet. His only option now was to confront Andrew directly. The thought terrified him, but what choice did he have? If Andrew truly was behind the disappearance of Adriana, there was no way he was going to let this man marry his mother. He couldn't risk it. So, he made a plan. A dangerous one. He would confront Andrew in front of his mother, and he would make him admit the truth. He didn't know how he was going to get Andrew to confess, but he knew that this was the only chance he had left. The weight of the decision settled on his shoulders like 1,000 pounds. It wasn't just about protecting his mother anymore. It was about facing a monster and exposing him for what he truly was. Miguel's heart pounded as he prepared for the confrontation, knowing that this would change everything. The day of the confrontation arrived faster than Miguel had expected. He woke up that morning with a heavy weight in his chest, the reality of what he was about to do sinking in. Every part of him wanted to back out, to let it go, but he knew he couldn't. If he didn't act now, his mother's life could be ruined. It wasn't just about proving he was right anymore. It was about saving her from a danger that was right in front of her. The entire morning, he sat with his nerves on edge, waiting for the right moment. His mother was out shopping with Andrew, talking about wedding plans, and Miguel knew that this was his chance. His stomach was in knots as he sat at the table, pretending to eat breakfast, his mind running through every possible scenario. What if Andrew turned violent? What if his mom didn't believe him? What if he failed? The doubts were suffocating, but there was no turning back. As soon as his mother returned, Miguel made his move. He'd asked her earlier if they could have a serious conversation, and she had agreed, thinking it was just another of his concerns. When she walked in, smiling, clearly in love with Andrew, Miguel's heart broke a little. But he pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about his emotions. It was about exposing the truth. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice shaking with the weight of the moment. She looked at him, surprised at his tone. "What's going on, Miguel?" she asked, her voice gentle, but her brow furrowing in concern. He took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about Andrew," he began. She tilted her head, her expression already defensive. "Not this again, Miguel," she replied, her voice tinged with irritation. "You've been going on about him for weeks, and I've told you he's a good man. Why can't you just accept that?" Miguel's hands tightened on the table, but he knew he couldn't back down now. "Mom, please just listen to me," he said, his voice more forceful than he intended. "I know you think I'm just being paranoid, but I have proof. Proof that Andrew is hiding something terrible." Helen paused, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, proof?" she asked, the protective mother instinct kicking in. Miguel didn't waste time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the phone he had hidden, the one with the files he had found. "I know you won't believe me, but I've been looking into him. And I found something. Something that ties him to a woman named Adriana Collins. She disappeared 2 years ago, and the last person she contacted was Andrew." He could see his mother's face shift, but it wasn't disbelief. It was confusion, followed by doubt. He pressed on, showing her the information he had gathered. "He's been hiding who he really is, Mom. He's not the man you think he is. He's dangerous." His heart was pounding and his palms were sweaty. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. But it was too late to turn back now. He watched his mother's face change as she processed the information. Her expression went from shock to anger, then to disbelief. "Miguel, you've gone too far," she whispered, shaking her head. "You don't know what you're talking about. Andrew has nothing to do with any of this." His mother's voice cracked, and Miguel could feel the wall between them growing. But he couldn't give up. "Mom, please, you have to trust me. You can't marry him. I'm telling you, he's not who he says he is. He's hiding something dark, and I won't let him destroy our lives." The silence between them felt suffocating. His mother just stood there staring at him, her expression unreadable. Miguel's chest tightened. The moment was slipping through his fingers. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the disbelief. It was as if his entire world had just come crashing down. He had never wanted to hurt her, but in that moment, it seemed like that was exactly what he was doing. "Mom, please, you have to believe me," he said, his voice breaking as he stepped closer to her. "I'm not making this up. I'm doing this because I love you and I don't want you to be hurt. I don't want to lose you to him." His words hung in the air, but they didn't seem to reach her. Helen's eyes welled with tears, and Miguel could see the conflict in her face. She didn't want to believe that Andrew, the man she had been planning to marry, could be capable of something so awful. He could see it, even if she wasn't saying it out loud. She wanted to deny it. But then, just as the weight of the moment became too much to bear, there was a knock at the door. It was Andrew. Miguel's heart sank. Of course, he had come to see her right when he was making his plea. Andrew stood in the doorway, looking just as perfect as ever with his charming smile and smooth demeanor. It made Miguel want to scream. His mother looked at Andrew, her face still pale but trying to muster some composure. "Hey, honey," she said softly, trying to smile. "We were just talking. Come in." Andrew walked in, his gaze briefly meeting Miguel's, and it sent a chill down his spine. There was something in his eyes now, a coldness that wasn't there before. Miguel knew this wasn't going to end well. But he couldn't stop. He had to make his mother see the truth, even if it cost him everything. "Andrew," Miguel said, his voice steady, despite the fear that was rising in him. "We need to talk." Andrew raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by the serious tone in Miguel's voice. "What about, Miguel?" he asked, his voice dripping with that fake politeness Miguel had grown so sick of. "What is it that's so urgent?" Miguel didn't hesitate. "I know what you did," he said, his words cutting through the room. "I know about Adriana Collins. I know you were the last one to see her, and I know you're hiding something. I'm not going to let you marry my mom and ruin her life." Andrew didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, his smile widened and it made Miguel's skin crawl. "You're a smart kid," Andrew said, his voice low and dangerous now. "But you don't know what you're messing with." It was then that Miguel realized the man standing in front of him wasn't just manipulative, he was dangerous. He had been hiding his true nature all along, and now it was finally coming out. The tension in the room was unbearable. Miguel's heart raced as he stared at Andrew, waiting for him to make his move. He could feel the weight of his own words hanging in the air. But Andrew didn't react the way Miguel expected. He didn't get angry or shout. Instead, he just stood there, calm, as if everything Miguel had just said didn't matter at all. Andrew's eyes, cold and calculating, bored into him. There was no warmth, no affection in that gaze, just pure, unfiltered menace. "You're a smart boy, Miguel," Andrew said again, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you're out of your league here. This isn't something you can handle." Miguel felt a shiver run down his spine. He had to fight the urge to step back, to cower under that icy stare. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. Not when his mother's future was on the line. "I don't care who you are," Miguel said, his voice more steady now. "I'm not going to let you hurt my mom. You're going to have to answer for what you did." Andrew laughed softly, almost like he was amused by Miguel's defiance. "Answer for what?" he asked, his voice dangerously smooth. "What exactly do you think you're going to do, huh?" It was at that moment that Miguel realized just how much danger his mother was in. Andrew wasn't just pretending to be the perfect fiancé. He was playing a game where he controlled everything and everyone around him. Miguel had thought he could confront Andrew with the truth, but now he saw that it wasn't going to be that easy. He had underestimated just how dangerous Andrew truly was. Andrew turned to his mother, a fake smile spreading across his face. "Helen," he said in that soft, coaxing voice, "I think we should talk about this later. Miguel is just having one of his moments. He's been like this for a while." Helen, still in shock, looked between her son and Andrew, unsure of what to say. But Miguel could see it in her eyes, the uncertainty. She wanted to believe Andrew. She wanted to believe everything was fine, but Miguel wouldn't let that happen. He couldn't let it happen, not when he had come so far. He took a deep breath, his hands clenching at his sides. "No, Mom," he said, his voice firm. "This isn't just a moment. This is real, and I'm not going to stop until you see it too. Andrew isn't who you think he is." There was a long, painful silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Miguel could feel his heart beating loudly in his chest, each thump echoing in his ears. His mother's eyes were full of confusion and hurt, but there was a flicker of something else too: uncertainty. For the first time, Miguel saw a crack in her belief that Andrew was perfect. He didn't know if it was enough, but he knew it was a start. Andrew, however, wasn't fazed by the tension. He remained calm, almost too calm. It was like he knew something Miguel didn't. "I see you're not going to let this go," Andrew said, his voice low, almost like a whisper. "That's fine, but don't think I won't deal with you. You're making a big mistake, Miguel, and you'll regret it." Miguel didn't flinch. He stared at Andrew, determined. "I'm not scared of you," he said, his voice steady now, stronger than it had ever been. "You can threaten me all you want, but I'm not backing down. Not now, not ever." His words were sharp, cutting through the thick tension in the room. Andrew's face twisted into a smile that sent chills down Miguel's spine. "You should be," Andrew said, his voice cold. "You don't understand the game you're playing. You're a kid, and you're in way over your head." At that moment, something inside Miguel snapped. He knew Andrew was dangerous, but hearing him speak like that, it made Miguel even more certain of his mission. He couldn't back down. He couldn't let this man intimidate him, not when so much was at stake. "You're not going to get away with this," Miguel said, his voice unwavering. "I'll make sure of it." Andrew's expression darkened, but he didn't say anything more. Instead, he turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. Miguel watched him go, his heart still pounding, but he didn't feel fear anymore. He felt a sense of determination, of resolve. His mother hadn't believed him yet, but he knew he was getting closer. He had to act fast, though. He wasn't sure how long he could hold on to this tiny victory before Andrew decided to make his move. That night, Miguel stayed up late, trying to piece together the evidence he had gathered. His fingers trembled as he searched through the files again, but something caught his eye: a name. It was connected to Adriana, but it was new. Someone from her past. Miguel's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the break he needed. If he could find this person, he could have the final piece of the puzzle that would expose Andrew once and for all. The next morning, Miguel was up before the sun. He couldn't sit still, his mind still racing from the night before. He had found the missing link, the final piece of the puzzle. The name he had found was tied to a man who had been close to Adriana right before she disappeared, a man who had been very vocal about his suspicions surrounding Andrew. Miguel couldn't waste any more time. He had to find this man no matter what. He called Emilio and Mateus, and they quickly agreed to help. Within hours, they tracked down the man's contact information. It wasn't easy, but they managed to get him on the phone. Miguel's hands were shaking as he introduced himself, explaining that he was trying to uncover the truth about Adriana's disappearance. The man on the other end of the line was hesitant at first, but after hearing Miguel's concerns, he agreed to meet. When they finally met that afternoon, Miguel's world changed completely. The man confirmed everything Miguel had feared. Andrew had been the last person to see Adriana, and the man had been trying to get the police to investigate him for months. The confirmation hit Miguel like a ton of bricks. Everything he had suspected was true. He had the evidence, and now, with this man's testimony, it was undeniable. Miguel's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and fear. It was time. He called his mom, his voice shaky but determined. "Mom, please listen to me," he said, his voice breaking. "I have proof. I know what happened to Adriana, and I know it's Andrew. You can't marry him. He's dangerous." For the first time, Helen didn't argue. She didn't dismiss him. He could hear the disbelief in her voice, but there was also something else. Fear. He could tell she was starting to realize that he wasn't making this up. With the new information, they went to the police. It didn't take long for the evidence to come together. Within hours, Andrew was arrested. The relief that washed over Miguel was indescribable. It wasn't just a victory for him, it was a victory for his mother. They were finally free of him. As the days passed, Helen's love for Andrew turned to disgust, and the relationship that had seemed so perfect fell apart completely. For the first time in months, Miguel saw his mother look at him with pride, with gratitude. She knew now that he had saved her, and he had saved their family from a man who could have destroyed them. The weight of the experience didn't leave Miguel, but he knew he had done the right thing. That day, he hadn't just confronted a monster. He had found the courage to protect his family even when it felt like no one else would. And that courage, he realized, would stay with him for the rest of his life.